Rancher saves Apache woman in desperate escape. Her gratitude no man could refuse. The sun was slowly dropping behind the distant hills, painting the wide sky in soft shades of orange and dusty pink. The ranch sat alone in that vast open land, surrounded by dry grass, scattered bushes, and long wooden fences that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a place where silence ruled, broken only by the wind and the occasional call of a bird. The rancher had lived there for many years, long enough to know every sound the land made and what each one meant. He was a man of routine. Every day followed the same pattern: wake before sunrise, check the animals, repair fences, work the land, and return home by dusk. He was not unfriendly, but he preferred distance. Life had taught him that quiet was safer. People brought complications, and he had already seen enough of those. That evening, as he walked along the fence line to make sure everything was secure before nightfall, something felt different. The air was heavy, not with heat but with tension. He stopped walking and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then he heard it, a faint rustle, barely noticeable, coming from near the far end of the fence. His hand rested on the wooden post as he narrowed his eyes, scanning the area. Animals wandered here often, but this sound was not the usual one. It was uneven, rushed, almost desperate. He took a cautious step forward, then another, careful not to make noise. That was when he saw her. She stood near the fence, gripping the rough wood as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her hair was tangled and dusty, her clothes torn and stained from travel and hardship. Her shoulders were tense, and her breathing was fast and shallow. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been running for a very long time without rest. When their eyes met, she flinched. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The land seemed to hold its breath. The rancher noticed the fear in her eyes, not fear of him alone, but fear born from something deeper, something chasing her even now. She was Apache, that much was clear from her features and the way she carried herself, even in exhaustion. There was strength in her posture, though it was weighed down by fatigue. He had heard stories. Everyone in these parts had. Stories of people being mistreated, misunderstood, or forced into situations they did not choose. He had never involved himself in such matters. He believed survival depended on staying out of trouble. Yet here she was, standing at his fence, silent and shaking. She raised her hand slowly, a clear sign that she meant no harm. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely louder than the wind. The words came out broken, uncertain, as if she was not sure she should speak at all. He didn't understand everything she said, but he understood enough. She needed help, water, a place to rest. The rancher hesitated. Helping her meant crossing a line he had never crossed before. This land was his responsibility. Anyone who brought danger onto it brought danger into his life. He glanced over his shoulder toward the open plains behind him, then back at her. His instincts warned him to be careful, but something else spoke louder. He noticed her hands trembling. Her feet were raw, her movements slow. This was not someone looking for trouble. This was someone running from it. Without saying a word, he turned and walked toward his house. For a second, he thought she might run, but instead, she followed at a careful distance. He fetched a canteen and returned, holding it out. She accepted it with both hands, drinking slowly like someone afraid the water might disappear if she rushed. As she drank, he studied the land around them again. That was when he heard it, voices, faint but real, carried by the wind. They were far but moving closer. His jaw tightened. He had been right. She was not alone. Her eyes lifted toward the sound and the fear returned, sharper than before. She stepped back instinctively, as if ready to flee again, even though she had no strength left to run. The rancher made a decision he could not take back. He gestured for her to follow him toward the barn, tucked away behind a small rise in the land. It was old but solid, hidden well enough from the main road. She hesitated only a second before moving, trusting him with the last of her strength. Inside the barn, the air was cool and smelled of hay and wood. He pointed to a quiet corner and handed her a blanket. She lowered herself to the ground carefully, as if every movement hurt. He noticed marks on her arms and legs, not fresh wounds, but signs of a hard journey. He said nothing, but his silence was heavy with understanding. She looked up at him then, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She spoke softly, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. He didn't need to understand every word to know what she meant. Outside, the voices grew louder. He stepped to the door and listened. He could make out shapes now, men moving across the land, calling out, searching. They were not asking politely. Their tone carried authority and impatience. The rancher felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. This was the moment where life changed. He could step aside, point them in her direction, and return to his quiet routines. No one would blame him. That was the easy path. Instead, he closed the barn door gently and slid the latch into place. He moved quickly, covering tracks near the fence, brushing away signs of movement. Years on the land had taught him how to read and erase trails. Every step he took was calm, controlled, purposeful. The men reached the fence line soon after. One of them called out, asking if anyone had passed through. The rancher stepped into view, his expression neutral, his voice steady. He answered simply, offering nothing more than the truth he chose to share. They searched nearby, their eyes sharp, their patience thin. The woman inside the barn held her breath, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the men moved on, their voices fading back into the open land. Silence returned, heavier than before. The rancher stood still for a long moment, listening until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he return to the barn and open the door. The woman looked up at him, her face filled with disbelief. She had expected fear. She had expected betrayal. What she had not expected was protection. He handed her more water and some food. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone relearning safety. As night settled over the land, stars began to fill the sky, watching quietly from above. Neither of them spoke much. Words were not needed. The choice had been made and both of them felt its weight. Far away, danger still existed. Morning would bring new risks, new decisions. But for that night at least she was safe. And the rancher knew one thing for certain. By helping her, he had stepped into a story far bigger than himself, one that would not end quietly. The land outside remained still, but somewhere beyond the darkness, consequences were already moving closer. The night grew deeper, wrapping the ranch in a thick blanket of darkness. The barn stood silent, its wooden walls holding more than hay and tools now. Inside, the woman rested on the ground, the blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders. Her breathing had slowed, but sleep did not come easily. Every small sound made her tense, as if she expected danger to return at any moment. The rancher sat on a low stool nearby, keeping watch. He was used to long nights alone, but this night felt different. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt fragile, like it could break at any second. He kept listening for footsteps, voices, or the sound of engines in the distance. After some time, the woman shifted and slowly sat up. The dim light from a lantern showed her face more clearly now. Dirt and dust marked her skin, but her eyes were sharp and aware. She looked at him, studying him the same way he had studied her earlier. She spoke softly, choosing her words with care. Her English was limited, but her meaning was clear. She thanked him, not in a simple way but with deep feeling, like someone who understood how rare his choice was. He nodded, unsure how to respond. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. He had not helped her for praise. He had helped because turning away had felt wrong. She asked quietly if the men would return. He did not lie. He told her they might. People who searched with that kind of urgency usually did not give up easily. The truth made her shoulders sink, but she did not argue. She had known this already. Running had taught her that danger often followed close behind. She began to share her story in pieces, stopping when the words became too heavy. She explained that she had lived under rules she did not choose. Decisions were made for her, and her voice had been ignored for too long. When she tried to leave, she was told she did not have that right. Fear had pushed her to run, even though she knew the land was unforgiving. The rancher listened without interrupting. He did not ask questions. He had learned that real pain did not need to be explained in detail to be understood. As the hours passed, the wind outside picked up, rattling the barn walls. The rancher stood and checked the area through a small window. In the distance, faint lights appeared again. His chest tightened. The search had not ended. He turned back to the woman and spoke in a low voice. She could not stay there much longer. The barn was safe for now, but daylight would make it easier for others to spot signs of her presence. If they were serious about finding her, they would return with more people. He told her about an old trail that cut through the land behind the ranch. It was narrow and hidden, used mostly by animals and known only to locals. It led toward rocky ground where tracks were harder to follow. She listened closely, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She asked if he would show her the way. The question hung between them. Helping her this far had already put him at risk. Leading her away would take him deeper into trouble. If anyone saw them together, he would be connected to her escape. The land he had worked his whole life to protect could be taken from him. He thought of the years he had spent building a quiet life, one careful choice at a time. Then he looked at her again. She was not asking for rescue. She was asking for a chance. He agreed. They waited until the night grew darker, until the moon was hidden behind clouds. The rancher put out the lantern and gathered supplies, water, simple food, and a small first aid kit. He moved carefully, avoiding the main paths. Before they left the barn, he handed her a hat and an old jacket. They were too big for her, but they helped her blend into the night. She accepted them with a nod, understanding the reason without explanation. They stepped outside quietly, the cool air brushing against their faces. The land stretched out before them, silent and watchful. Every sound felt louder now, the crunch of gravel, the rustle of grass, the distant call of an animal. They moved slowly, keeping to the shadows. The rancher led the way, choosing each step with care. He pointed out places where the ground was soft and could leave tracks, guiding her around them. She followed closely, copying his movements as best she could. Halfway to the trail, they heard voices again. This time they were much closer. The rancher froze, raising his hand for her to stop. They crouched behind a cluster of rocks as flashlights swept across the land. The voices were tense, impatient. The men were spreading out, searching more carefully now. The woman's breathing quickened. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stay silent. The rancher could feel the fear beside him, sharp and real. One of the lights passed dangerously close to their hiding place. For a moment, it seemed impossible that they would not be seen. Then, without warning, the woman shifted. She rose slightly, drawing attention away from the rocks. A small sound escaped her, just enough to pull the light toward her position. The rancher turned, shocked, realizing what she was doing. She was protecting him. The light moved toward her, and before the men could get closer, she ran in the opposite direction, pushing her tired body beyond its limits. The rancher hesitated only a second before moving. He ran not toward her but away, leading the search off course, using the land to his advantage. The men shouted, their lights splitting in different directions. Confusion spread among them. The rancher circled back carefully, using a dry creek bed to hide his movement. Minutes later, he found her again, crouched low behind a fallen tree, struggling to catch her breath. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. She looked up at him, guilt and gratitude mixed in her eyes. He shook his head gently. There was no anger, only understanding. They continued on, reaching the hidden trail at last. The rocky ground made walking harder, but it erased their tracks. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the sky, they were far from the ranch. They stopped to rest near a cluster of stones. The woman leaned against one, exhausted but determined. She looked at the rancher and spoke slowly, carefully. She told him she would never forget what he had done, not just for saving her but for treating her like a human being, not a problem to be solved. He listened, feeling something shift inside him. This was no longer about helping a stranger. It was about standing by a choice. As the sun began to rise, they both knew the hardest part was still ahead. The search would continue. The danger was not over. But neither of them felt alone anymore, and that knowledge gave them strength to keep moving forward. Morning light slowly spread across the land, turning the dark rocks pale and warming the cold air. The woman sat quietly, her back against a large stone, eyes half closed as she tried to gather her strength. The rancher stood nearby, watching the horizon. He knew daylight brought both safety and risk. They could see better now, but so could anyone searching for them. They rested only a short while. He handed her water, reminding her to take small sips. She nodded, listening carefully. Her body was tired, but her spirit was still strong. When she stood, she did so with effort, yet without complaint. She was determined to keep going. They moved deeper into the rocky ground, where sharp stones and uneven paths made travel slow. The rancher chose routes that avoided open spaces, keeping them close to natural cover. He showed her how to step on firm ground and avoid loose gravel. She watched his feet and followed, learning quickly. As they walked, she began to talk again, not all at once but in pieces. She spoke about her childhood, about learning to listen to the land and respect it. She talked about her family and how life had changed when rules were forced upon her. Her voice stayed calm, but the meaning behind her words was heavy. She did not speak with anger. She spoke with honesty. The rancher listened. He had lived most of his life in silence, believing words often caused more trouble than they solved. But now he understood that sometimes being heard was a kind of healing. He did not interrupt or judge. He simply walked beside her, steady and present. By midday, the sun grew stronger. Heat rose from the rocks, making the air shimmer. The woman slowed, her steps becoming uneven. The rancher noticed and suggested they rest again. He found a shaded area near a cliff where the wind moved freely. They sat, sharing food and water. She looked at him then and asked a question he had been avoiding. Why was he helping her? He thought carefully before answering. He told her he did not see her as trouble. He saw her as someone who needed help, and he believed that turning away would have stayed with him longer than any risk he faced now. His words were simple, but they were true. She lowered her eyes, deeply moved. She told him that many people looked at her and only saw labels. Very few had looked at her and seen a person. Her gratitude was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and steady, like a promise carried in the heart. As the afternoon passed, they heard a sound that made them both freeze. A vehicle engine echoed faintly through the distance. The search was widening. The rancher scanned the land and spotted dust rising far away. They had to change direction. He led her toward a narrow canyon where tall stone walls offered cover. The path was difficult, forcing them to move single file. At times the woman stumbled and the rancher reached back to steady her. Each touch was careful and respectful, meant only to help. Inside the canyon, the air was cooler. Sounds echoed strangely, making it hard to tell where they came from. They moved slowly, stopping often to listen. The rancher used hand signals now, guiding her without words. Suddenly, voices echoed ahead. They were closer than expected. The rancher's heart pounded, but his mind stayed clear. He spotted a small ledge higher up the canyon wall. It was risky, but it was their best option. He helped her climb first, lifting her when her strength failed. She trusted him completely, placing her safety in his hands without hesitation. They reached the ledge just as the voices grew louder below. From above, they watched as several men passed through the canyon, scanning the ground and talking loudly. The woman held her breath, her hand pressed to her chest. One man stopped and looked up, his eyes searching the rocks. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The rancher stayed perfectly still, knowing movement would betray them. After a long pause, the man turned away, convinced there was nothing there. When the voices faded, the woman finally exhaled. Her legs trembled and she sat down heavily. The rancher stayed close, making sure she was steady before helping her down. They waited a long time before moving again. As evening approached, the land changed once more. The rocky ground gave way to scrub and low hills. The rancher recognized the area. They were nearing a place where he would have to make a difficult choice. If he went any farther, turning back would be harder. People would notice his absence from the ranch. He stopped walking. The woman noticed immediately. She looked at him, reading the worry on his face. She understood without him having to explain. This was where their paths might separate. She told him she could continue alone if needed. She had learned enough to survive. Her voice was strong, but her eyes showed sadness. She did not want to leave this way, not after everything he had done. The rancher felt the weight of the moment. He thought of his land, his animals, and the life he knew. He also thought of what would happen to her if she went on alone, tired and still being searched for. He made his decision. He told her he would stay with her a little longer, long enough to make sure she reached a place where she could truly be safe. He did not know what would come after that, but he knew he could not stop now. Her face softened, relief washing over her. She did not speak right away. When she did, her words were filled with quiet respect. She promised that whatever happened next, she would remember his kindness for the rest of her life. As night returned, they found shelter beneath a rocky overhang. They built a small fire, careful to keep it hidden. The flames flickered softly, casting shadows on the stone walls. They sat together in silence, sharing warmth and simple food. The woman looked into the fire, thinking about how quickly life could change. One moment, she had been running alone. Now, she was no longer alone. The rancher stared at the flames as well, realizing that his quiet life had already shifted. There was no going back to who he had been before that evening at the fence. Somewhere in the darkness, the search continued. But for now, they rested. And both of them knew that when morning came, the choices ahead would demand even more courage than before. The fire burned low as the night passed, and when morning came, the sky was pale and quiet. The woman woke first. She sat up slowly, listening to the sounds of the land. There were birds calling far away and the soft movement of wind through dry plants. No voices, no engines. For a moment, peace felt possible. The rancher stirred soon after. He stood and stretched, then carefully put out the last bit of fire, covering the ashes with dirt and stones. He knew even the smallest sign could be noticed by someone trained to look. When he finished, the place looked untouched, as if no one had rested there at all. They shared the last of the food and water, eating slowly. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt heavy this morning. Each step forward would carry more risk, and both of them understood that. As they moved on, the land opened into a wide stretch of ground with scattered bushes and long views in every direction. It was dangerous territory. There was nowhere to hide if someone spotted them. The rancher slowed his pace, watching carefully for any sign of movement. It did not take long. In the distance, several figures appeared, spread out and moving with purpose. They were not wandering. They were searching. The woman stopped walking. Her shoulders stiffened and the old fear returned to her eyes. She did not panic, but she knew what this meant. They had been found again, or at least the search had reached this far. The rancher studied the land, thinking fast. Running would only draw attention. Hiding would not work for long. The only option left was to face what was coming, but to do it on his terms. He told the woman to move toward a low ridge and stay hidden. She hesitated, shaking her head. She did not want to leave him. She did not want him to take all the risk alone. He looked at her firmly and spoke in a calm voice. He told her this was the only way. He promised he would be right behind her. After a long moment, she agreed. She moved quietly, crouching low and using the land for cover until she disappeared from sight. The rancher walked forward alone. He stood tall and visible, hands relaxed at his sides. When the men noticed him, they changed direction and approached. Their faces showed surprise. They had not expected to find anyone willing to stand in the open. One of them spoke first, asking questions. Had he seen a woman pass through? Was anyone hiding nearby? The rancher answered slowly and clearly. He did not raise his voice or show fear. He told them this was his land and that he had seen nothing unusual. He made it clear that he would not allow anyone to search without reason. The men grew frustrated. They were used to people stepping aside. They pressed harder, their voices sharpening. One of them stepped closer, trying to intimidate him. The rancher did not move. He reminded them that the land had rules and that not every rumor gave them the right to cross boundaries. He spoke with confidence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and where you stand. For a long moment, it seemed like the situation might turn worse. The air felt tight. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then something changed. One of the men looked past the rancher, scanning the land again. There were no clear tracks, no proof, just suspicion and anger. Finally, another man spoke, telling the group it was time to move on. They could not waste daylight arguing. Reluctantly, they stepped back. Their eyes lingered on the rancher, filled with warning and irritation, but they turned away. One by one, they left, their figures growing smaller against the land. The rancher waited until they were completely gone. Only then did he turn and walk back toward the ridge. The woman emerged slowly from her hiding place. Her face showed shock and relief mixed together. She had watched everything, her heart pounding as she saw him stand alone against them. She walked toward him, her steps unsteady. When she reached him, she stopped, unable to speak at first. Her eyes filled with emotion, not weakness, but something deeper. Respect. Gratitude. Awe. She told him no one had ever done that for her before. No one had stood firm when it mattered most. Her words were simple, but their meaning was powerful. The rancher nodded, unsure how to respond. He felt a strange mix of relief and heaviness. The danger had passed for now, but he knew it had cost him something. Those men would remember him. Life at the ranch would not return to normal easily. They continued walking, but their pace slowed. The land ahead led toward a safer route, one that would take the woman closer to people who could protect her. The rancher knew this was where his part would soon end. As the hours passed, they talked more openly. The woman spoke about her hopes, about wanting a life where she could choose her own path. The rancher spoke about the land, about how it teaches patience and honesty to those who listen. When they reached a crossroads marked by a lone tree and worn ground, the rancher stopped. This was it. He explained that beyond this point, others would notice him if he went farther. He had done all he could. The rest would have to be her journey. The woman stood quietly, absorbing his words. She nodded, understanding the truth in them. Still, leaving felt heavy. She reached into a small pouch she carried and took out a simple item, something personal. She held it out to him. It was not valuable in money, but it carried meaning, a reminder, a symbol of trust. He accepted it carefully, realizing what it represented. She thanked him again, this time with a steady voice. She told him that what he had given her could never be repaid with words alone. She promised that his kindness would live on through her actions. They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to turn away first. Finally, she took a step back, then another. She did not rush. She walked forward with purpose, her head held high. The rancher watched until she was nearly out of sight. Before she disappeared, she turned one last time and raised her hand in farewell. Then she was gone. The rancher remained where he was, the land stretching silently around him. He felt changed, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, lasting one. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be questions. There might be consequences. But as he turned back toward his ranch, he knew something else too. He had done the right thing. And whatever came next, he would face it the same way he faced everything else, standing firm, guided by the choices he could live with. The rancher walked back alone under the open sky. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because he was tired, but because something inside him had shifted. The land looked the same as always, the wide fields, the fences, the quiet hills, but he was not the same man who had walked away from it days earlier. When he reached his ranch, the animals greeted him as they always did. Life had continued in his absence. He checked the fences, filled the water troughs, and moved through his chores with practiced ease. To anyone watching, it would have seemed like nothing had changed. But inside, his thoughts were louder than the wind. That night he sat on his porch longer than usual, watching the stars appear one by one. He thought about the woman, where she might be now, whether she was safe, whether the world beyond the ridge had treated her more kindly. He reminded himself that she was strong, that she had survived far worse than the road ahead. Still, worry lingered. In the days that followed, visitors began to appear near the ranch. Some asked questions casually, pretending curiosity. Others were more direct. Had he seen anyone unusual? Had someone passed through his land recently? The rancher answered carefully, always calm, always truthful in the way that mattered. He did not give names or details. He stood by his land and his words. Most people moved on, but a few left with narrowed eyes and silent judgments. He felt the weight of their attention, but he did not regret his choice. Weeks passed. The land shifted toward a new season. The air cooled and the nights grew longer. Slowly, the tension eased. The questions stopped. The roads grew quiet again. One morning, as the rancher repaired a fence near the edge of his property, he noticed something unusual. A figure stood at a distance, not approaching, not retreating, just waiting. He straightened and watched carefully. As the figure stepped closer, recognition struck him like a sudden breath. It was her. She looked different now, stronger. Her posture was confident, her movement steady. The fear that once shadowed her eyes was gone. In its place was calm determination. The rancher stood still, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as she came closer, he knew it was real. She greeted him with a warm smile, one that carried relief and gratitude all at once. She told him she was safe now. She had found people who respected her choices, who offered support instead of control. She had built a new path, step by step. She thanked him again, but this time her voice carried peace instead of desperation. She explained that she had come back not out of need, but out of choice. She wanted him to know that his decision had changed more than one life. Others had been helped because she found the strength to speak up, to stand firm, to refuse silence. The rancher listened quietly, feeling something loosen in his chest. He had never expected to hear this. He had helped because it felt right, not because he hoped for an outcome. She handed him a small bundle, wrapped carefully. Inside were items that symbolized her journey forward. Not a gift meant to repay a debt, but a shared reminder of trust. He accepted it with respect. They talked for a long time, sitting under the open sky. They spoke about the land, about the future, about how small moments could carry great weight. There was no rush, no fear, just understanding. Before she left again, she looked at him and said something that stayed with him long after she was gone. She told him that kindness given freely never truly leaves. It travels, it grows, and it finds its way back in unexpected forms. When she walked away this time, the rancher did not feel loss. He felt peace. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. The rancher continued his work, but he carried a deeper awareness now. He noticed people more. He listened more. He understood that silence did not always mean safety, and that standing firm did not always mean standing alone. Years later, stories spread quietly across the region. Stories of a rancher who chose integrity over ease. Stories of a woman who reclaimed her life and helped others do the same. No one knew all the details, and that was fine. Truth did not need attention to matter. The rancher aged as all men do. His hair turned gray, his steps slower, but his eyes remained clear, steady, unafraid. He had learned that courage was not loud or dramatic. It was often quiet, built from simple choices made at the right time. On his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on how one moment at a fence line had reshaped everything. He had not planned it, he had not expected it, but he had answered it honestly, and that was enough. The land grew quiet once more, holding the memory gently, as the wind carried the story forward, of respect, humanity, and a gratitude that no man could refuse, because it was rooted not in debt but in shared dignity.